All right, so how's it going, everyone? My name is Brandon Bocchino, and welcome to Nited History. So originally, I made this episode yesterday. It was 37 minutes long. Looking back, I was working at the food bank this morning, processing a couple thousand pounds of chicken and pork, when I realized that what I should do is cut this up into 4 or 5 separate episodes, because I could drone on about really any country or politics going on anywhere for hours on end. So we're going to break this up. This first episode is going to be just about Lebanon's political parties and the political dynasties that have held power since the Lebanese Civil War, which ended in 1990. The same Speaker of the House voted in back in 1992 during the first free elections. It's the same guy in 2020. How have these dynasties held on to power? How have the political parties shaped the structure of Lebanese government and essentially made it to where it's their own little piggy bank? So we're going to get into this. Stay tight. I'm going to get changed real quick. I smell like chicken and pork because I've been around meat in the food bank all day on the east side of Indianapolis. It's a wonderful experience. If you're living here in Indiana, you need to get your butt down there and help us out at the food bank. But anyway, besides the point, let's get into it, folks. Let's get into Lebanese politics and why, personally, I don't think anything's going to change, even as horrific as this event was, and it was. 300,000 homeless overnight. And that's awful. And it's shocking to think that won't change anything, but let me explain why. Be right back, guys. All right, everyone, let's get right into this. Welcome to Nited History, Lebanese politics. So the way that the government and the political parties have established themselves in Lebanon, the system has gotten very corrupted. It has eroded to almost nothing. But really, when you look at the beginning of Lebanese politics and free and fair elections in 1992, you can already see the troubling signs that show that this is going to be basically the same bad actors who aren't necessarily seen as bad actors all the time by the Lebanese people. Depends on which group you're talking to. The same guys, militia leaders and warlords from the Lebanese Civil War from 1975 to 1990. Ended up getting elected into office in 1992 in the first free elections. So one of those individuals, Nabi Berri, he's who I was speaking about as the Speaker of Parliament, who has been in power since 1992. It's 2020 now. How do you become Speaker of Parliament for almost 3 decades, 3 whole decades? That's a long time to hold on to the same political office, especially one that's that high up the food chain in a democracy. So part of why that is, in my opinion, is the fact that while Lebanon is a democratic republic, they're also a confessionalist state. So confessionalism means that the duties of government are split between religious lines. So 50-50 parliament split, with one half being Christian, the other half being Muslim. And then the different roles of government. So the president of Lebanon is always Maronite Christian. The Speaker of Parliament is always Shia. The Prime Minister, is always Sunni. And so because the individual holding that office always has to be of the same religion, I think that's kind of how you get some folks who stay in there for a very long time, because once you're trusted by all the different groups, and to put this in perspective, so there's two different camps of politics in Lebanon, and that formed in 2005 during the Cedar Revolution. I'll get into that a little bit later, maybe not in this video, maybe the next video. But basically you have these 2 different groups. So every party that you see with a star next to it holds a seat in parliament. So I will flip it over here in a second. But note that the Free Patriotic Movement holds the most seats in parliament with 24. And then Hezbollah, which we always hear about here in the United States because the U.S. has designated Hezbollah a terrorist organization. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just going to talk about politics here. Hezbollah only holds 13 seats in parliament, but we hear about them all the time on the news here in the United States. But yeah, they only hold 13 seats in parliament out of a 128-seat parliament there in Lebanon. So then if we'll flip it over here, so then you'll see the other 2, the Popular Nazarite Party, as well as the Islamic Charitable Programs Organization. Now, Nazarism, to my American friends here who aren't familiar with that term, the second president of Egypt, Nasser, he created a form of Arab socialism mixed with anti-colonialism and a few other aspects. I'm not going to get totally into Nazarism here. that has taken hold and root in a lot of different Arabic countries across the Middle East, or Southwest Asia, I should say. And so with that, and then also note here, there are 17 others that I didn't even list, but they didn't hold political office, so I didn't really feel a need to write every single one out. I would need to make a few more chalkboards, and I didn't have enough recycled material to make more chalkboards with. And then you have the March 14th movement, which again arose out of 2005 during the Cedar Revolution, which I'll explain here in a second, just a little bit. But the future movements, the biggest one over here. Then you have the Lebanese forces, and then another thing to consider here. So Lebanese forces, that is a Christian secular party, if I'm not mistaken, and then the future movement is a Sunni secular party. So the parties are split up along religious lines as well as different fundamentals. Some are secular, some are a bit more fundamentalist with their religion. But they all have different goals and aspirations, which also makes, the fact that just because they're all grouped together doesn't mean they always get along. But that's who they tend to stick with. And then also with the Free Patriotic Movement, that used to be the biggest party of March 14th movement, the board I just had up, but they switched sides in 2006. And I'll explain a little bit about that as well. So the Cedar Revolution that kicks off this new set of political division in Lebanon happens when the first prime minister of Lebanon, Rafik Hariri, gets assassinated in 2004. He's assassinated by Hezbollah militants backed by the Syrian government. Now, because it was never proven per se, well, that's not true. So there was a tribunal in The Hague in 2014 which tried 4 Hezbollah militants absentee for the crime of assassinating Rafik Hariri. They were backed by the Syrian government. The Syrian government at this time had 14,000 troops and agents, foreign secret agents, stationed in Lebanon, kind of policing, and they were also, in their words, preventing more Israeli intervention, because you get a lot of different Palestinian militant groups in the south of Lebanon doing border raids into Israel, and that would elicit an Israeli response. But basically what happens is they back the assassination of Rafik Hariri. The Lebanese people get very upset by that, and so the March 14th movement comes out in protest on March 14th of 2005 in big numbers, pushing back against Syrian occupation. Syrian troops withdraw from Lebanon in April of that year, if I'm not mistaken. I believe they start withdrawing before that, and then they finish withdrawing by April. But at its height, Syria had about 25,000 troops in Lebanon, and they've had them there for 23 years. In the March 8th movement, part of what their deal is that they support Syria's intervention in Lebanon. They believe that Syria helped end the Lebanese civil war. I'm not going to get into that. I just know that that's how they feel. And then what's interesting is the Free Patriotic Movement, which is now March 8th, was the basis of March 14th, was very against Syrian occupation. But after Syrian troops withdrew, the Free Patriotic Movement, a year later in 2006, which was being administered, the party was being administered by Mikhail Aoun, which is the current president of Lebanon. See, it's the same names controlling different aspects of life there in Lebanon. He signs a deal with Hezbollah. Basically, Hezbollah is going to, they're going to disarm, because at this point in 2005, they are an extremely armed militia in Lebanon, and they still are. And part of that is because the deal was they're going to disarm if a prisoner swap happens. And I'm not particularly sure what all happened there, but basically Hezbollah did not demilitarize, but the Free Patriotic Movement still with the March 8th camp. And that's only because of the way that they view security threats to Lebanon, essentially. Yeah, it's a really interesting story there in Lebanon, these different parties and camps and why they disagree. But basically just know that they carry the grievances of the Civil War with them on their shoulders every day they go into office to work. And on top of that, along with the corruption and the fact that a lot of these parties, especially just in my opinion, the March 8th camp, is especially beholden to outside forces, especially Hezbollah, because Hezbollah gets a lot of their resources from the Syrian and Iranian governments. And so you have a lot of foreign influence, a lot of foreign influence and foreign interference in the way Lebanese politics and government operate. And that has led to this just steep decline in responsibility and a huge rise in negligence, which is what led to 2,750 tons of ammonium nitrate being stored on a dock in Beirut Bay. And I don't know if it's called Beirut Bay. Sorry, that's just kind of a hype. Anyway, they that's what allowed these chemicals to ignite and blow up, was just sheer negligence and corruption. And I just think it's funny that the IMF back in July had anchor reforms set for Lebanon. There was a $5 billion deal on the table for economic investment in Lebanon, but they had anchor reforms that they needed to see done first before they could trust the Lebanese government with $5 billion. And none of those were accomplished. And they've been asking for those for years. Now, what's interesting was something that the IMF highlighted was customs. And customs is what failed in this entire event that allowed this chemical to be stored improperly and then ignite under the conditions it did, because customs was being pillaged by the politicians. Everything was being, looted, stolen, taxed improperly. Any way they could squeeze a dime out of customs, they were. And then on top of this, because there are groups in Lebanon such as Hezbollah that the U.S. has designated a terrorist group, they don't get a lot of funding, obviously, to assist with their growth, because to fund certain groups in Lebanon, in the eyes of the U.S. judicial system, you are funding terrorism. And so it's really hard to get money into the right hands in Lebanon. But groups like the Red Cross, Red Crescent, what have you, I would always guarantee with those groups. But yeah, it makes the entire, when you look at all the different thorns with Lebanon, with the politics, the way the government's established, the way people stay in power for 30 years, it has been a drag on Lebanon's development. And then folks that do come in, like Rafik Hariri and his Horizon 2000 plan to boost the economy of Lebanon, they just get assassinated. And so even if you want to go help and you're a Lebanese citizen living abroad that wants to come back, you still have a fear and anxiety of, well, if you get too good at being good, you're going to be gone real soon. So all these factors come into effect with Lebanon. It's definitely an interesting country to get into. I'm probably over 10 minutes at this point. I have no idea. But we're going to get into the economics, the corruption, and everything else with Lebanon in future episodes. Thank you for tuning into Nited History. Again, just keep in mind that with Lebanon, you have a lot of hands in the cookie jar, and everyone's trying to get their piece. All these different political parties and their different affiliations, different religious groups, and the way that they hold on to power in Lebanon, because they're entitled to, the way the Constitution is written, being a confessionalist state. And the fact that, just here in the United States, our perspective of Lebanon is very different, very skewed because of the way that we view Hezbollah and these other groups. Not saying that, our views are wrong on Hezbollah. I'm just saying that it's part of that reason is made it hard for us to be able to give and be charitable with Lebanon in the same way the U.S. is with other countries. And Lebanon's also, it's a country of, 60 billion GDP. It's probably being generous, with a $90 billion shortfall. I'll get into that in the economic episode, but they just have so many things against them that change is going to be hard. It's going to take them 10, 15 years if they started today to get things sailing in the right direction. But anyway, it is what it is. The international community and good-hearted people such as, myself and others I see out there, we're going to be here. We're going to be helping you out. We're going to be doing what we can. A couple bucks to Red Cross as well as the different UN foundations there might not seem like a lot, folks, but when all of us are pitching in, it really makes a difference. So just keep that in mind. Keep educating yourself. Keep learning. This was a really basic crash course on this. There is so much more to talk about with the March 8th and March 14th parties. I'm having a hard time trying to just stick to one thing I want to talk about because there's so many things I feel like I need to address, especially with the March 8th camp, that we as concerned citizens of the world need to know. So again, thank you for tuning in. This has been Nited History with Brandon Bocchino. Maybe I'll make a little video about myself and why I do this stuff, and give you some background as to why I love history so much and politics. But good day, everyone. Peace, love, and happiness to you. I will see you in the next episode here. Hopefully, be out in the next few days. Thank you, folks.